The night the fire took everything from him, his wife, his parents, his home, Ben Carter stopped believing in miracles. For 3 years he lived like a shadow, with only his son and his old K9 partner, Hunter. Until one morning, on a fog-covered road in Montana, he saw an old man struggling with a broken fence. He almost kept driving, but he stopped. And that small choice, that moment of simple kindness, would change everything. Because sometimes, the people we save are the ones who save us back. If you believe that kindness can still heal what life has burned away, subscribe and stay for this story. The morning light crept over Montana, pale and cold, brushing the snow-covered rooftops with a weary glow. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath before another day. Ben Carter woke before dawn, as he always did. The small house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the slow rhythm of his own breathing. He poured black coffee into a chipped mug and stood by the window, staring into the gray-blue light. Outside, Hunter sat in the yard, an old German shepherd with a coat of gray and brown, watching the woods as if guarding the silence itself. Ben opened the door and stepped out, the air biting against his skin. He knelt beside the dog, his hand tracing the scar along Hunter's shoulder. "Still keeping watch," he murmured. The dog's ears twitched. Ben smiled faintly, the first sign of warmth on his face that morning. It was a small ritual, but it reminded him that something loyal had survived the fire. Inside, the hallway still smelled faintly of smoke, no matter how many years had passed. The fire had taken nearly everything: his parents, his wife, the home he had built with his own hands. Only Owen had survived, small and trembling in his arms that night, as Hunter barked through the burning chaos. Now the boy was 8, and Ben had learned to live in quiet, steady steps. He woke, worked, and kept moving, not because he was healed, but because stopping would mean falling apart. The badge on his jacket wasn't just duty, it was armor. He dressed for patrol. Navy police jacket zipped neatly, black tactical pants, boots laced tight. Before leaving, he checked on Owen, still asleep under a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. The boy's hair was messy, his breathing soft. Ben watched for a moment longer than necessary, then whispered, "I'll be back before breakfast." Hunter followed him to the door, nails clicking on the floor. Outside, the world was waking in silence. The streets of Elkford were wrapped in frost. Ben drove slowly, headlights cutting through thin fog. The radio crackled with morning chatter, but he left it off. His route wound past frozen fields and shuttered shops, past the same corner where the fire had started 3 years ago. He didn't look at it. Some things you learn to see without seeing. He stopped near the bridge, the one that crossed the narrow river. The water below was half ice, half movement, like memory refusing to freeze. Hunter leaned forward from the back seat, watching with calm eyes. Ben stepped out, resting his hand on the cold metal railing. The wind bit at his face, but he stayed there, breathing deeply. "We're still here," he said softly. The words disappeared into the mist, but somehow he felt them answered. When he returned home, the sun was climbing over the pines. Owen was waiting on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders. Hunter trotted ahead, tail swaying. Ben looked at his son, then at the horizon glowing faintly gold. For the first time in a long while, he thought maybe the fire hadn't taken everything after all. Fog rolled thick over the valley that morning, swallowing the trees and softening the edges of everything it touched. The air smelled of wet pine and iron. Ben slowed the patrol car as the dirt road curved toward an old wooden fence. The boards leaned at tired angles, held together more by habit than strength. Beside the gate stood a man, thin, stooped, wrapped in a faded gray coat. He was pulling at a length of broken wire, the metal cutting into his gloved hands. Ben stopped the car, stepped out, and called gently, "Need a hand?" The old man didn't look up. "I can manage," he said, his voice rough but steady. His hair was white and uncombed, his face carved deep with years of wind and worry. Ben walked closer anyway. "It won't take long," he said, already bending down. The man sighed through his nose but didn't move to stop him. Together, without a word, they tightened the wire and pressed it back into place. When it was done, the fence stood straight again, a fragile line between solitude and the world. Ben brushed his gloves together. "That should hold for a while." The old man gave a short nod, neither grateful nor cold. Silence settled like dust. As Ben turned to leave, he added softly, "If you ever need help again, just leave your porch light on." The man said nothing. His eyes followed Ben for a long moment, unreadable, before he went back to the fence. A week later, the fog returned, thicker this time, heavy with frost. Ben was driving the same road when a faint yellow glow pierced the mist, a porch light burning steady through the gray. He slowed, heart tightening with a feeling he didn't quite understand. Hunter stirred in the back seat, tail thumping once against the door. "Yeah," Ben murmured, "I see it too." He pulled over, stepping into the cold. The world was hushed, every sound muffled by fog. At the gate, he saw the same man standing by the porch, one hand on the railing, the other raised slightly in a gesture that wasn't quite a wave but wasn't nothing either. Ben nodded, a quiet promise passing between them. Some lights, he thought, were meant for calling people home. The wind came colder that morning, sharp enough to carry the smell of pine sap and distant smoke. Frost clung to the porch railings, and the air hummed faintly with silence. Ben parked by the same fence, the thermos of coffee warm in his gloved hands. Hunter jumped down beside him, stretching, tail swaying once before falling still. When Ben knocked, the door opened slowly. Frank stood there in his brown sweater and gray coat, his thin face lined deeper by the cold. Surprise flickered across his features, quickly replaced by quiet acceptance. "You again," he said, voice hoarse but softer than before. Ben lifted the thermos slightly. "Brought coffee." Frank nodded. "Porch'll do." They sat side by side on the steps, mugs steaming between them. The woods beyond were still, just the faint sound of wind sliding through the trees and Hunter's slow breathing near their feet. Ben sipped from his cup and said, "My boy still wakes up from the fire sometimes. He's 8 now, but he remembers too much." He paused, watching the steam rise. "He can't stand the sound of sirens. Neither can I." Frank didn't speak at first. His gaze drifted to Ben's right hand, resting on his knee. The skin along the back scarred, the color uneven, a memory of heat that refused to fade. "That from the fire?" he asked quietly. Ben nodded, pulled Owen out through the window. The frame was already burning. Frank's fingers trembled as he lifted his mug. "You both made it?" he said, more a statement than comfort. "Barely," Ben answered. "Some days, I'm not sure which parts of me did." The silence stretched, deep and kind. Frank's eyes were on the distance now, unfocused. "You know," he began slowly, "not everyone who survives keeps living. Some of us just stay." The words settled between them like falling ash. Ben didn't answer, but something in his face shifted, just slightly, a softening around the eyes. "You mean that for me or for you?" he asked. Frank gave a faint shrug. "Doesn't matter. Fire leaves marks where it wants." Hunter lifted his head then, letting out a low sound that wasn't quite a whine, something between recognition and sorrow. Ben reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Guess that's true for both of us," he said. Frank's mouth twitched, the shadow of a smile passing through. For a while neither spoke. The frost began to melt from the porch rail, dripping rhythmically like the ticking of an unseen clock. When Ben finally stood to leave, he handed Frank the thermos. "Keep it," he said simply. Frank nodded, gripping it with both hands as if holding something heavier than metal. As Ben stepped down the path, Frank's voice followed him. Quiet, worn, but steady. "Next time, bring the boy." Ben turned back just once, meeting his gaze. "I will," he said. Hunter walked beside him, their steps slow, the sound of boots and paws fading into the quiet. Morning. The air that morning was brittle, carrying the faint smell of frozen leaves and smoke. Sunlight came late, sliding across the frost like a hesitant hand. Owen had begged to come along. Ben had said no twice before finally giving in, the boy's small insistence softening something in him. The patrol car rattled down the quiet forest road, its tires crunching the first dusting of snow. Hunter sat upright in the back, his head close to the window, ears twitching to every sound of the woods. When they arrived at the old fence, the house looked lonelier than before, its roof bowed slightly under the season's weight. Frank was nowhere to be seen. "Stay close," Ben said. Owen nodded, stepping out carefully, his breath puffing into the cold air. He began gathering small branches near the gate, humming softly to himself. Hunter trotted beside him, paw prints forming twin trails in the white dust. Ben was about to call it a day when the porch door creaked open. Frank appeared in the doorway, his figure framed by the weak morning light. "Didn't expect visitors," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. His eyes rested on the boy, quiet and unreadable. Owen hesitated, then stepped forward, clutching something in his mittened hand. "I made you this," he said. He held out a small folded card, colored pencils pressed hard onto paper, the drawing simple but bright. A man, a boy, and a dog, standing beneath the sun. "That's me, my dad, and Hunter," he explained softly. Frank took it, his gnarled fingers tracing the uneven lines. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the effort of memory. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the house. The silence stretched. Owen looked uncertainly at his father. Did he not like it? Ben placed a hand on his shoulder. "Give him time," he said. The boy nodded, though disappointment clouded his face. Hunter sat beside them, head tilted, watching the house with quiet curiosity. The door opened again. Frank stepped out holding a small wooden frame. The glass was cracked in one corner, the edges worn smooth from years of being touched. Inside was a faded photograph of a young boy, about Owen's age, laughing beside a bicycle. The sunlight in the photo seemed warmer than the world around them. Frank's voice broke the stillness. "His name was Daniel," he said. "My son." He paused, his breath shaken. "He would have been 40 now, but I stopped saying his name a long time ago." Ben didn't speak. The boy in the photograph looked like summer itself, untouched by time. Owen stepped closer, eyes wide. "He looks happy," he said. Frank smiled faintly. "He was, until the world forgot to be kind." His voice thinned with the wind. Hunter let out a low whine, almost a sigh, the kind of sound that belongs to understanding. For a while they all stood there, 3 generations and one old dog, connected by grief and the fragile grace of remembrance. Frank looked down at the drawing still in his hand. "Thank you, son," he whispered. The words meant for more than one boy. Ben met his eyes, seeing in them something fragile and alive again. As they left, the porch light flicked on against the gray morning, burning softly through the mist. Snow was falling sideways, driven by a wind that howled like a living thing. The patrol car rocked against the gusts, its headlights swallowed by white. Ben sat behind the wheel, coat buttoned to the throat, the radio crackling faintly with static. Each breath fogged the glass before fading into the dark. Hunter lay curled on the passenger seat, half asleep, his fur glinting under the dashboard light. It was a night meant for silence, until the radio broke it. Fire reported North Ridge, single structure, possible occupant. Ben's stomach tightened. Without thinking, he started the engine, the tires skidding on the icy road. The world outside was a blur of snow and sirens, the red light cutting through the storm like a heartbeat. When he reached the clearing, he knew the place instantly. The crooked fence, the outline of the porch. Frank's house. Flames tore through the roof, climbing into the night like desperate hands. Ben threw open the door, shouting for help that no one could hear. Hunter barked once, sharp and urgent, then leapt ahead into the smoke. The heat hit them like a wall. Ben covered his mouth with his sleeve, eyes stinging as he pushed through the haze. Inside, the air was thick with burning wood and memory. Then he saw Frank collapse near the table, his face pale beneath the flicker of orange. Ben dragged him up, coughing, his scarred hand blistering again from the heat. "Come on, old man," he muttered, "not like this." A beam cracked above them. Hunter's bark split the roar of fire. Ben turned just as the ceiling began to fall. There was no time to move. The dog lunged forward, knocking Ben aside, the weight of the burning timber crashing down where he had stood. The sound that followed wasn't a cry, it was the deep, guttural bark of defiance, echoing once before fading beneath the collapse. Ben stumbled, clutching Frank, and fell through the doorway into the snow. The cold bit at his skin, the world spinning in red and white. Behind him, the house groaned, then shuddered into silence. Rain mixed with snow began to fall, slow, heavy drops that hissed against the dying embers. Ben knelt there, Frank motionless beside him, Hunter lying still in the slush. He pressed a trembling hand to the dog's fur. A faint breath lifted once under his palm, then stopped. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath too. Somewhere far off, the wail of sirens approached, carried thinly by the storm. Ben stayed where he was, his coat soaked through, whispering words that broke apart in the wind. When the rescue lights finally reached them, he didn't look up. Frank was alive. Hunter was not. And the snow kept falling, softly, endlessly, bearing the fire's last light. The thaw had begun. The snow along the fence turned to slush, and the first drops of meltwater slid from the eaves of Ben's porch like slow tears. The days were longer now, but the light felt thinner. Hunter limped beside him whenever he walked, his gait uneven yet steady, each step a quiet echo of survival. The fur on his shoulder had grown back, silver against the scar beneath. Some nights, Ben would wake to the sound of soft breathing near the foot of the bed, and for a fleeting second, the world felt right again. But Frank's house at the northern ridge remained silent, its roof dark against the distant sky. Ben had gone there once after the fire. The yard was charred, the earth still smelled faintly of smoke. He had left a lantern by the gate, though he knew there was no one left to see it. 2 weeks later, Ben drove to the city hospital. The halls smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. He asked for Frank Delaney. The nurse, a woman with tired eyes, looked at her clipboard and said softly, "He was discharged this morning, didn't leave an address." Her voice carried the kind of finality that made questions pointless. Ben thanked her, though he didn't know why, and stood for a long moment by the window, watching the gray winter light move across the parking lot. A month passed. Life folded back into routine, patrol shifts, homework with Owen, the quiet rituals of a man learning to live around silence. Then one morning, a black sedan stopped by the front gate. The knock on the door was polite, almost hesitant. The visitor was tall, in his 50s, wearing a long, dark overcoat and holding a leather briefcase. "Officer Carter?" he asked. "My name is James Whitmore. I represent the estate of Mr. Frank Delaney." He opened the case, producing a thick gray envelope. "He asked me to give you this personally." Ben took it with both hands. The paper was rough, the edges worn as though handled many times. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single handwritten letter, the ink faint but steady. "Ben, if you're reading this, I'm gone. You don't need to know who I used to be. Just know that you reminded me of something I thought had died with my son, the belief that there is still goodness left in this world. I'm leaving the farm to you. Do with it what feels right to your heart. Frank Delaney." The words blurred for a moment before coming back into focus. Ben folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease with his thumb. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet soil and pine, spring returning to a land that had known too much fire. Hunter stood by the doorway, watching him quietly. Ben knelt, running a hand along the dog's scarred shoulder. "We'll go see it tomorrow," he murmured. "Maybe it's time we brought some life back to that place." The dog leaned gently against his arm. For the first time in months, Ben smiled. Small, unsure, but real. Spring came late that year, slow and uncertain. The snow melted unevenly, leaving behind dark veins of earth and the scent of pine sap in the air. Ben stood before the remains of Frank's old farmhouse, the chimney still standing like a tired sentinel. For a long while, he said nothing. The wind moved through the burned timbers with a whispering sound, like something trying to speak after too long in silence. In his coat pocket was the letter, creased now from being unfolded too many times. "Do with it what feels right to your heart." He read the line again and again until the words seemed to settle somewhere deeper than memory. He decided that this place, scarred but still standing, should not end in ashes. It deserved breath again. Construction began in summer. Ben worked alongside volunteers, veterans, old friends from the force, even strangers who had heard about the story of the fire. He used the funds Frank had left, every cent accounted for, though it felt less like spending and more like giving something back to the world. By fall, a new roof stretched over the land, the scent of sawdust mixed with wet soil. Inside, sunlight spilled over wooden floors that still carried faint scorch marks beneath the polish. Hunter, limping but proud, followed him from room to room, sniffing at corners, tail low but steady. The dog had survived the fire, carrying a quiet grace that no one could quite name. Ben named the place Delaney Haven, a rescue and rehabilitation center for retired service dogs and children who had lost family to tragedy. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a promise made real. Owen spent afternoons teaching the kids how to brush and feed the dogs, his laughter carrying across the yard like something long forgotten. The old bell on the porch rang at sunset, signaling dinner. And every evening, Ben lit a small lamp by the door, the same signal Frank had once left for him in the dark. Only now, it burned not as a call for help, but as a light of welcome. Sometimes, when the night grew still, Ben would sit outside with Hunter by his feet, the wind rustling through the grass. He thought of Frank, of the boy in the photograph, of the life that could have been, and the one that still was. In the distance, the mountains faded into the dusk, blue and eternal. He took a slow breath and whispered, "We made it, old friend." Hunter looked up, eyes reflecting the porch light. Steady, faithful, alive. Morning light slid gently across the hills, soft and gold. The snow was gone now, replaced by young grass and the quiet hum of spring returning. The air smelled of pine and thawed soil, and in the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the sky. Ben drove the familiar road slowly, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on Hunter's back. The old shepherd leaned against him, still walking with a limp but alive. Gray fur ruffled by the breeze coming through the window. Owen sat in the back seat, sketchbook on his knees, drawing something he refused to show until it was done, The world outside rolled past in calm silence, the forest reborn, the sky clear and forgiving. When they reached the bend, Ben slowed the car. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a simple wooden sign he had carved himself. The letters were neat but slightly uneven, etched by hand and weathered by the wind. In memory of Frank Delaney, the man who believed in kindness. Beneath it, wildflowers had started to bloom, small and stubborn against the old fence line. Ben stepped out, standing for a moment with the sound of the engine ticking behind him. Owen joined him, his small hand finding his father's. "Dad," he asked softly. "Who was he?" "Really?" Ben looked at the sign, then at the road ahead. His voice came low, gravelly from years of smoke and silence. "Just a man who once needed to be seen," he said, "and I was lucky enough to stop." For a long time they stood there, the three of them, watching sunlight filter through the branches, turning everything gold. Hunter gave a single quiet bark, the kind that sounded almost like agreement. As they got back in the truck, the sun climbed higher, glinting on the windshield. The road stretched forward, winding through the green hills. Owen laughed at something Hunter did, and Ben smiled. A real smile, not born of duty, but of peace. He glanced once more in the rear-view mirror, where the sign was already fading behind them, half hidden by light. Somewhere deep in his chest, he felt it. Not grief, not loss, but a quiet understanding. That kindness never really ends. It just finds new hands to carry it forward. The patrol car rolled on through the awakening forest, the morning wide and full of promise.